7-year-old boy climbed into a stranger's car believing that he was going home to his mother. Instead, he was kidnapped. He wouldn't see his family again for 7 years, and when he finally did escape, he didn't come back alone. Stephen Stainer was 7 years old. He lived with his parents, Kay and Dilbert, and his 3 sisters and his older brother in California. He was just an ordinary little boy growing up in a very close-knit family, but on the 4th of December in 1972, everything changed. Stephen was walking home from school when he was approached by a man named Irvin Murphy. Irvin told Stephen that he was collecting donations for his church and asked if his mother might have anything to donate. Stephen, being an innocent 7-year-old, said that she probably would, and believing that he was simply getting a lift home, Stephen climbed into the car. He would not see his family home again for 7 years because waiting in Irvin's car was 39-year-old Kenneth Parnell. Kenneth Parnell was a convicted sex offender with a long criminal history. Psychologists had warned for years that he posed a danger. He had convinced Irvin that he needed to raise a young boy as part of a religious arrangement, and Irvin believed him. Instead of taking Stephen home, Kenneth drove him to a remote cabin in Cathy's Valley, California. He told Stephen that he had spoken to his parents and that they wanted him to stay there, which is absolutely heartbreaking because Stephen probably believed that to be true. The following day, Kenneth began sexually abusing Stephen, and this abuse would go on for years. Whenever Stephen cried for his family, Kenneth told him that his parents didn't want him anymore. He claimed that they couldn't afford him and that they had just chosen to give him away. Stephen was even given a new name. He was called Dennis Parnell. Less than a month later, Stephen was enrolled in school under that new identity, with Kenneth pretending to be his father. Over the years, the pair moved around California. Missing posters featuring Stephen had been distributed to schools across the state, but somehow none of them ever reached the schools that Stephen was actually going to because he was always enrolled in a school. To everybody on the outside, Kenneth and Stephen appeared to be a normal father and son, but behind closed doors, Stephen was living in an absolute nightmare. As the years passed, Stephen had the odd chance to escape, and sometimes Kenneth would leave him home alone, but Stephen never chose to run. After years of manipulation, he truly believed that his parents didn't want him anymore, and he just thought that he had nowhere else to go. 7 years after Stephen was kidnapped, Kenneth began looking for another child. Stephen had grown older, and he now no longer fit Kenneth's preferred age range, which is absolutely sick. Kenneth pressured Stephen to help him find another young boy, so Stephen deliberately would sabotage every single attempt because he didn't want another child to be living the life that he was. Eventually, Kenneth would recruit one of Stephen's teenage friends, a boy called Sean Pullman, and together they targeted 5-year-old Timothy White. When Timothy tried to run away, Sean chased him, pulling him away from a chain link fence that he was clung onto and forced him into Kenneth's car. Timothy had been abducted, just like Stephen had been 7 years earlier. Timothy would cry for his family every single day. Stephen immediately recognised what was happening. He knew that is what had happened to him 7 years ago. He knew exactly what Timothy was about to endure, and he could just see everything unfolding out before him. So every day, Stephen rushed home from school to make sure that Timothy was never left alone with Kenneth. He didn't want to give him that opportunity. Then after just 2 weeks of Timothy living there, Stephen made a huge decision. He decided that he wasn't going to let another child lose 7 years of their life. While Kenneth was working a night shift, Stephen and Timothy quietly walked out of the house. Together, they hitchhiked more than 40 miles away. Timothy was absolutely exhausted, and Stephen often had to carry him through the rain. When they finally reached a town, Timothy couldn't even remember where he lived. So Stephen looked up the address of the local police station, and they walked there instead as a starting point to figuring out how they were going to get home. Stephen encouraged Timothy to go inside and to tell the officers his name, but Timothy was just terrified, and he ran back to Stephen crying. A police officer luckily noticed this happening and approached them. At first, the officers were very suspicious of Stephen. He told them the entire story, and early the next morning, Kenneth Parnell was arrested. At the trial, Kenneth's defence argued that Stephen could have left at any time, but because of legal limitations in place at the time, Kenneth couldn't be prosecuted for Stephen's original kidnapping, which is wild. Many of the sexual assaults committed against Stephen were also never prosecuted. Irvin Murphy would be convicted of kidnapping, Sean Pullman was convicted of his role in Timothy White's abduction, and Kenneth Parnell received a sentence of just 7 years and was released on parole in 1985. So many people were absolutely outraged by this very lenient sentence, and it forced California to change its laws. Despite everything that he had endured, Stephen rebuilt his life. He got married, he became a father, and he devoted himself to helping helping other victims. But tragedy would strike again when on the 16th of September 1989, Stephen was riding his motorcycle home from work in heavy rain when a car pulled out in front of him. Stephen wasn't wearing a helmet and he died less than an hour later in hospital. He was just 24 years old. More than 500 people went to his funeral, and one of the pallbearers was 14-year-old Timothy White. The inscription on Stephen's casket simply read, "Going home." Timothy went on to become a deputy with Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. He got married, he had children of his own, but sadly in 2010, at just 35 years old, he also passed away. As for Kenneth Parnell, he attempted to arrange the kidnapping of another young boy in 2003, and this time he would be sentenced to 25 years to life. He died in prison in January 2008. Stephen Stainer may have spent 7 years as a victim, but he made sure that he ended his story as a hero by saving Timothy White too.